Okay, so the second part of this video series is going to deal with the second part of the Tropes versus Women in Video Games video series by Anita Sarkeesian. And one of the very first issues I have is that she mentions how video games just portray a crude and unsophisticated male power fantasy, and these were kind of one of the few unjustified accusations she makes throughout the entire video series, and it just feels like it's not quite right because why would game developers go through all the trouble of eventually adding so much character development and plot development to games if it's just going to be a male power fantasy? Why not just make it the same way as it was before? There's no point to it whatsoever. And if you switch the roles around for the damsel in distress to become the female protagonist, wouldn't that mean the same thing? Like how she mentions how Crystal was supposed to be the main character of her own game, wouldn't that just mean it would be a crude and unsophisticated female power fantasy? And this is one of the major issues that I have that she does throughout the entire video series, is that she makes these sort of accusations without any sort of real justification or hard evidence. Okay, so the second issue that I have is that Sarkeesian mentions some of the HD remakes of some very old games, such as Double Dragon, and that the damsels in those games gain a little bit of power towards the end to stick one against the last boss who had kidnapped her in the beginning. And this is supposed to show that game developers have noticed that how women were previously portrayed in video games, and that this idea is changing now. And she says that this doesn't really matter, when I think it does, because they wouldn't have put it in there if it doesn't show that in some respect or another. And the thing is about it is that it deals a lot with the argument that I made before. You can't really take a character out of its original characterization without the situation presenting itself in such a way where they need to be used for that greater cause or be able to have the same abilities as the main protagonist. And usually with these HD remakes, they're clean cut and they're pretty much the same game, only with better graphics. They don't really change the story much at all so that the damsel gains some sort of power within it. And so the idea is behind this is that these old types of games, they can't really be changed for what they were known for in the beginning. So that means that new franchises have to come out where women are the titular characters and are unable to do everything that a male character is able to do within the video game. And I did mention this before, but it seems to be that that Sarkeesian does not really mention this at all throughout her entire video series. Okay, so the next issue that I have is that she mentions how, or accuses video games of inciting domestic violence against the female character by transforming them in some sort of way, and then the male protagonist has to fight them with violence in order to put them back to normal or something. And I was wondering that if this happens, if this is the accusation, then couldn't this same argument be used as to why they're not used for main character roles as well? For example, the newest reboot of Tomb Raider had a lot of controversy and a lot of issues with it because the main character, Lara Croft, experienced a lot of violent situations within that game, and it was met under a lot of scrutiny for different sexist reasons. When in fact it was just that they were putting her into violent situations, and she was just reacting to them in whatever way possible. She was the main character and had all the powers, but because she was in these violent situations, that other sort of arguments were being conducted, like was this a rape scene, or was this another type of scene, or was this sexually suggestive, rather than it just being a scene where it's violence against violence against violence against people in general. And the other issue that I have with this accusation is that she only mentions how it's domestic violence because the character is female, But what happens when the character is male themselves, or the female, or the main character themselves is female, and they are faced with another female character that is blood related or is in a relationship with them in some way or another? This is why I had such an issue with it, because in the franchise Devil May Cry, in the third one, Dante, the main protagonist, has to fight his brother Virgil multiple times, and then in the first one, Virgil is transformed into Nero Angelo, and Dante has to fight him once again. Now, both of these are male characters, and they are blood related, but why isn't this considered domestic violence? Why is it only when the character is in a relationship with them and is female that it is somehow considered domestic violence? Okay, so the next issue that I wanted to talk about, and it deals a lot with the one that I just mentioned, is when Sarkeesian talks about the game Spelunky. Now, within the game Spelunky, there's an active damsel in distress that you have to save for different reasons, and that you can change the character model for them within the options menu. The the different options are a dog, a stereotypical female, and a stereotypical male. And my issue exists when she says, well, my issue starts when she says that the stereotypical female is a problem, but the stereotypical male is not. Now, if you look at the male character model, he has a very upper muscular body, and this is a gender stereotype that is attributed to men. Now, I was wondering why it's an issue, why the gender stereotypes are not attributed to males when it comes to their physique or something, but when it comes to the damsel in distress, an example would be when she mentions the game in Princess Peach, with Princess Peach, where she has to go and save Mario and Luigi, and Mario and Luigi are in the damsel in distress, that the genders don't matter and that this trope is just wrong in general. Why is it there that suddenly males start to count, but not when it comes to their physical appearance? Okay, so the next issue that I wanted to talk about is when she mentions how the different kinds of revenge storylines in video games that are fed to male players eventually imprint on them and don't give them the ability to respond to death and tragedy in any other way. But I was wondering, what about justice? See, you have to achieve justice whenever someone is wronged in some way or another through a set guide of principles. And within a video game, this is done through following that set guide of principles, and that's through how you play the game. Just like within reality, people have to achieve justice through the set guide of principles, which is the law system. And this deals with one of the arguments that I had made previously, that people have the ability to distinguish between reality and a virtual simulated world. And the issue with this argument is that she mentions quite the opposite within the video as well. She talks about how just because males who play video games play a lot of them over time does not mean that they imprint on them in any sort of way and automatically makes them sexist. But if it doesn't make them automatically sexist, then how come when they play all these video games that have revenge storylines that they're not able to react in death or to death or tragedy in another way except revenge? This is actually a contradiction. Okay, so another issue that I had was when she mentions that the death of a woman that is close to the male protagonist somehow gives them their power to fight back or something, or when the spirit slash soul of a woman that is close to the male protagonist is stolen, and the male protagonist has to fight back in order to gain her soul back as if she is his possession in some way or another. And she attributes this to some sort of gender power control sort of thing. But what about when it comes to monogamy within relationships and the powerful aspect behind that? I don't know why it's always gender specific when it comes to these sorts of things and not how it deals with relationships between people. It's the reason why people help out each other is because they know each other in some way or another, or they're close to each other. And that's why you wish to save them. You don't randomly save women just because they're women. You save a woman or a man if they are close to you. Like, if your brother needed to be saved, you would definitely go out and try to save them. You wouldn't save them just because they're not a woman. Okay, the last issue that I wanted to talk about is the violence against women issue. Now, she mentions in her definition that violence against women is only when they're victimized, and that when they're in combat situations, it doesn't really matter because they're on an equal playing field. But see, she doesn't consider this as a reason as to why female characters are not ever used for the main protagonist role. Because within the situation of the game or the plot, there are moments where she becomes victimized in some way or another, just like the male character has to be victimized in some way or another. And so these sort of like sexist accusations can be placed against the game as well. This can be seen in the game, the new Tomb Raider reboot, where in certain instances it's claimed that she has been raped or something, when actually she was just killed by some sort of character or another. And this is the reason why many female characters within video games have to be transformed, or something has to happen to them in order for violence to be used against them or used for them in some way or another. It's that no one can really deal with the fact that women are in these violent situations. An example would be Metroid itself. Now, if it was shown throughout the series that Samus Aran, without her power suit, was fighting all these people, and that she was getting ripped to shreds or something by the space pirates, that would be a very violent situation for her to be in. And this is not something that can be easily transferred over to players, and it would be very they would be very distraught by it. So a power suit was implemented in order to prevent this. And also, an example of this can be seen within the series God of War, which Sarkeesian mentions multiple times. Now, within God of War Ghost of Sparta, Kratos' mother is transformed into a hideous monster in order for him to fight against her and save her from some sort of possession. But when he fights his half-brother Hercules, or Zeus, his father, he brutally punches them in the face and murders them. And these kinds of scenes, if they were used for women in general, would not transfer over well to the audience. This idea can also be seen in the game The Last of Us. Now, within The Last of Us, there are multiple characters who are female who have titular roles, such as Ellie or Marlene or even Tess, and they're both used in multiple ways, and violence is used against them in some ways, but they're not usually seen in those sorts of situations. And this can be even further traced within the game, because the human characters that you fight throughout it, the completely human ones, are all male. Yet when it comes to the bungled, zombified enemies, some of them are women. And that's because only when women are transformed in some way or another that violence can be used against them in some way. Because if you see later in the game, Ellie has to face David within the restaurant, and some of the scenes were considered to be a rape scene or something, when in fact she was just going to be killed. It's this issue that keeps coming up over and over again within these games, that it's the reason why women aren't used really for main protagonist roles. It's because the violence that is used against them, or that they have to use themselves, does not really transfer over well to the audience or to our society in general. Now, that's not to say video games haven't tried to at least change this ideology. Within the game Battlefield 4, you're able to pick a female character model now, and the female character model is able to shoot and fight just as much as the male character models. But the thing about it is that characters are not allowed to commit certain kinds of misogynistic acts towards them at all, and this is actually enforced within the game. And this marks the end of the second part of the video series. Now, in the third and final part, I'll be talking about some of the generalized ideas that came up throughout the entire discussion, as well as some of the things that Anita Sarkeesian has said that I do agree with and actually are very well constructed arguments.